16. Riding for King's Landing. Chapter 16. Riding for King's Landing. Ding. End +1 for your intense bed performance. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room with a warm, golden hue. The faint sound of waves crashing against the shore drifted in through the open window, mingling with the occasional chirp of distant birds. Ariane lay beside me, her head resting on my arm, her hair a dark cascade over the silk sheets. Her finger lazily traced circles on my chest, the cool press of her touch contrasting against the warmth of the room. "So," she murmured, her voice light but edged with something deeper, "when are you leaving?" "This morning," I replied, my tone casual, though I could feel her body tense slightly against mine. "Yes, in a couple of hours." Her lips pursed, and she frowned. "Can't you wait? It's not as if you're on a timer." I let out a quiet laugh, my hand brushing her side. "I am on a timer, in fact," I said. "As beautiful Dornay, and its princess, is, I can't be idling here. I have 7 kingdoms to reclaim. Just wait for me, I'll be back in no time." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You better, unless some other man steals me while you're gone," she teased, her grin playful but her gaze sharp, gauging my reaction. My hand slid lower, cupping her ass with a firm squeeze. She let out a soft whimper, her lashes fluttering. "After last night?" I asked, my lips curling into a smirk. "I doubt you'll be satisfied with anything less than a dragon dick. And well, if you still whore around," I trailed off, my tone turning mockingly disappointed. "It'll be a shame to see my current #1 queen candidate lose her position." Her scowl deepened, but not because I called her a whore, she'd heard a lot worse the whole night. It was because of the last line. She looked at me, and the corner of her mouth twitched as if fighting a smile. "Right, priestesses can't be queens," she said, her grin sharpening. "I guess I'll have to wear a chastity belt, then." Ariane Martel was a whore in all but name, and I wasn't blind to that. She was too flirtatious, too unrestrained, and far too accustomed to getting what she wanted. That was why she'd never be my queen, not in this lifetime or the next. But still, she was mine now, and I wasn't about to let her forget it. I decided to mention her behavior to a baron. The entire old palace knew by now that I'd bedded the princess. Her moans weren't quite restrained, so they must be assuming she'd be my queen. So if I mentioned her whore-like behavior to her uncle, he would figure out my intentions. His Elaria and their daughters wouldn't let Ariane spread her legs for just anyone if it risked the position of queen. Especially not with the second son stationed here. They'd be too wary of loose lips spilling secrets. Yawning, I let my hand wander upward, brushing over her round, soft boobs before giving one a grope. "It's time for me to get up," I said, nudging her with my chin. "So better to work, princess. Use your mouth." Her lips parted slightly, a soft whimper escaping her as her cheeks flushed. She bit her lip, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Yes, Daddy." She moved between my legs, her obedience unquestioning as the warmth of her mouth embraced me far more than the warmth of the morning light. ***. The scent of spiced wine hung heavy in the air, mixing with the clatter of goblets and the coarse laughter of men who knew only battle as their constant. The dimly lit chamber buzzed with energy, the kind that came when men drank just enough to lower their guard without dulling their edge. I sat among them, my back resting lazily against the high-backed chair. Dario Naharis was at my side, his sharp grin practically a permanent feature of his face. He sipped his wine with the practiced ease of a man who knew how to enjoy life without ever letting his guard down. His eyes flicked toward me. "So, you're leaving, Your Grace?" he asked, his tone casual but the curiosity beneath it clear. "Not Your Grace yet," I replied with a faint smirk, tilting my goblet just slightly toward him. "But I like the sound of it." Dario's grin widened. "Oh, I think you are. You've got 1,000 second sons under your command, and from what I've heard," he leaned in, lowering his voice but not enough to hide his amusement, "from the old palace last night, it sounds like you've got 30,000 Dornishmen, too." The laugh that left me was low and smooth. "Fair point," I said, raising my goblet slightly in acknowledgement. "And yes, I'll be leaving soon." "How many men are you taking?" he asked, swirling his wine as though the answer were just as important as the drink. "Last time we spoke, you mentioned." "Same plan as before," I interrupted, my tone calm but carrying the weight of finality. "I'm going alone." My gaze swept the room, noting the men whose laughter came a little too easily, whose movements were just a little too deliberate. "And before you ask, No, I can't share the details. Too many ears, even here. But if I need your assistance, Prince Abarin will reach you. Dario raised his goblet with an approving nod, his grin shifting into something sharper. Understood. To your success, then. The clink of our goblets was a muted sound compared to the din around us, but it held more weight. I downed the rest of my wine in one smooth motion before setting the goblet aside. Rising from my seat, I gave Dario a short nod before stepping away. The hall noise faded behind me as I walked through the corridors of the old palace. The stone walls cast long shadows in the faint light, the silk curtains swayed gently in the breeze, and the faint scent of citrus teased the air. It's about time, I thought, the faintest flicker of a smirk pulling at my lips as the door to the meeting room loomed ahead. I'd mention Ariane's case first and then announce my departure. My boots echoed softly against the stone, each step steady, deliberate. The laughter from the hall was a distant hum now, replaced by the quiet anticipation that had become a familiar companion. The door creaked open as I pushed it, and I stepped inside, my thoughts already on the road ahead. All right, Prince Viserys, have a swift journey, Prince Doran said, nodding at Viserys. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and citrus as it wafted through the water gardens. Sunlight dappled the tiled paths, its reflection glinting off the still pools. Abarin Martell leaned against a carved pillar, his sharp gaze fixed on the figure preparing to leave. Thank you. Viserys Targaryen sat astride a white horse, his hair bleached black and his face wrapped in cloth, leaving only his sharp silver eyes visible. The transformation was striking, practical, but striking. It would hide him well enough, though Abarin couldn't help but feel that no disguise could mask the fire that radiated from the young prince. Fire was difficult to contain. A crowd gathered at the gate. Beside Abarin, Princess Ariane stood silently, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the departing figure. Her expression was carefully blank, but Abarin knew her too well. She looked like she was holding her breath as if his departure would rob her of air. Good, Abarin thought, let her feel that weight. It would keep her tethered. She's in love already, he murmured to himself, amused. He glanced at her sidelong, noting the faint tension in her jaw. A single night had been enough to snare her heart. That could work in Dornay's favor. He thought back to his conversation with Viserys the previous evening. The prince had been blunt, as always. I'm not aiming for marriage, not yet, he'd said. It had annoyed Abarin at first. He disliked the idea of his niece being left with false hopes. But Viserys had been clear. While he had no immediate plans to make Ariane his queen, he didn't want to give Dornay false promises, either. He admired her, and perhaps she could be queen one day. But only if she earned it. It was honest. Abarin respected that, better this than an empty scam. He'd spoken with Ellaria afterward, asking her to keep an eye on Ariane. If there was even a sliver of a chance she could rise to queen, then she needed to stay pure, untouched by scandal or poor choices. At least for now. I'll be writing now, Viserys called, his voice breaking Abarin's thoughts. He nodded, about to respond, when the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the courtyard. Heads turned as a figure emerged from the shaded paths of the water gardens, her dark horse cutting an imposing silhouette. Kinvara. Her crimson robes caught the sunlight, making her appear as though she carried fire itself. She rode with effortless grace, her red hair gleaming like embers, her smile sharp and knowing as she reined in beside Viserys. You're leaving without me? She asked, her tone laced with amusement. Viserys tilted his head, his gaze flicking over her. A red priestess is conspicuous, he said, his voice edged with skepticism. You'd stand out too much. Not if I want exactly that, Kinvara replied, her smile deepening. I'll simply say I'm here to preach. What's suspicious about a woman spreading the word of her God? Besides, she added, her tone softening into a teasing lilt, you need an identity, don't you? You can't just appear in King's Landing with nothing. My presence will give you credibility should your outlandish powers slip. Viserys frowned slightly, and if they hang you? The largest sept that worships the seven gods is in King's Landing. Religious leaders have a mutual respect for one another, Kinvara replied, her confidence unwavering. At worst, they'll warn me to stop preaching if I gain too many servants. But I won't gather servants, that isn't my goal. So I'll be safe. She glanced at his bleached hair. And besides, this, she gestured to his hair. One good reign and your secret are out. You should have asked me sooner. Before he could respond, she snapped her fingers. Her hair shimmered, shifting from its glossy black to a sleek, fiery red in an instant. She looked at him, arching a brow. Easy, isn't it? Viserys groaned. You could have told me that before I went through 3 wigs. It was funny, she said with a grin. But no more wigs. I'm coming with you. Azor Ahai needs his priestess, doesn't he? A baron watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. The priestess was too smooth with him, too confident. Dangerous. She would be a threat to Ariane's position, Dorne's position, if weren't a priestess. Even so, she needed to be kept on watch. A sudden idea sparked in his mind. Perhaps I can help, a baron said, stepping forward. His voice carried the easy charm he always wielded so effectively. Varys little birds have long wings. Unfortunately, even here in Dorne, they wouldn't know your secret, I can assure you that much, but they'd notice a red priestess traveling from here to King's Landing. That's enough to draw suspicion to Dorne. Kinvara tilted her head, her smile faltering slightly as she listened. He clapped his hands, and 8 girls carrying weapons stepped up. 3 among them stood out. But, a baron continued, his tone shifting, if suspicion is inevitable, then let us use it to our benefit. My daughters are skilled in more than just poison. They can fight, spy, and kill when needed. You can take them as your followers with the excuse that they're servants to the Red Priestess. Their presence will lend you protection, and they'll be more eyes and ears for you in King's Landing. Ilaria's hand touched his shoulder lightly, a silent question in her gaze. He met her eyes, his expression softening slightly. Trust me, his look said. She sighed, nodding. You uncle. Ariane's head snapped to look at him, and he ignored her. She was feeling threatened, but he'd explain to her later. Both Ariane and Ilaria seemed to understand what he was doing. If not Ariane, then perhaps one of his daughters could secure a place of influence besides Viserys Targaryen. Maybe not as queen, but as lovers. After all, Ilaria and a baron weren't married either. Yet, she was invaluable to him. Viserys considered this, his sharp gaze flicking over a baron and then to the sand snakes, who had stepped forward at their father's silent command. The 3 eldest, Obara, Nymeria, and Tyene, stood tall, a step before the others. All right, Viserys said at last, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I'll take the 3 of them. Too many would just get in the way. A baron clapped his hands, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. 3 more horses, then. The morning ended as 5 riders rode out through the gates of the old palace. Viserys, Kinvara, and the 3 sand snakes, Obara, Nymeria, and Tyene. The rising sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and Doran and a baron watched them go, his mind already turning over the threads of his plans. One way or another, through one girl or another, Dorne was going to secure a high position in the new empire that'd be born. 23 comments 0 vote. 17 The Ruler of Stormlands. Chapter 17 The Ruler of Stormlands. The journey from Dorne was more grueling than I'd anticipated. God's grace lay far behind us, a few hundred kilometers away, so the journey was getting a bit better. The harshness of the Dornish sun was replaced by the cooler winds as we trudged through Prince's Pass. The land shifted around us, a place where sand and rock gave way to craggy hills and pine needles underfoot. The pass was both a natural marvel and a reminder of just how far the borders of Dorne stretched. We rode in silence, with only the sound of horse hooves accompanying us. I'd almost grown fond of that sound. The path curved between steep cliffs, shadowed by jagged peaks that seemed to pierce the sky. Around Kinvara and I, the sand snakes rode with ease, their eyes always scanning the trail, watchful for threats. It was Tyene who broke the quiet, her eyes half-lidded in boredom as she glanced my way. What do you think of this, your grace? She stammered and asked. I like the gentler wind. Though I have to admit, I wouldn't have been able to appreciate it this much if I hadn't experienced the harshness of the Dornish sun. Anyways, how long do you think we need to travel from here? I asked in casual interest. I already knew the answer. I had naturally done my research before on such a long journey, but it was worth stirring up some conversation with these dour-faced warriors. Another month, maybe less, Nymeria replied, her voice as dry as the land we left behind. It had already been about 10 days since we left. If the gods are kind, your grace. Which they usually aren't. A chuckle slipped from Kinvara's lips. Not a true statement, Lady Nymeria. Let's not argue about our religious views, girls, I put a stop to them. By the way, just call me Vis since it'd be troublesome if people heard you call me your grace, I said, and the sand snakes nodded. Kinvera shrugged, her gaze moving back to the cliffs above us, unconcerned. Obara grunted something indistinct, the words lost to the steady sound of our horses' hooves against stone, and the conversation died again, as fleeting as the whisper of wind through the peaks. ***. 2 weeks later, we were passing through Summerhall, the land softening into rolling fields dotted with green and gold. We avoided the main roads whenever possible, opting for old trails that twisted through the hills, away from prying eyes. Viserion had been hunting wild buffaloes and other animals whenever she was hungry, and although that didn't give me much experience, I still managed to level up a little. I liked how I could receive levels even when she was the one doing the killing. Page Viserys Targaryen, the Dragon King. 22 years old, level 14, 17 STR, 22 End, 17 Dex, 19 Int, 19 Luke, 20 Off, page I was feeling more powerful than ever. It was a good feeling. Soon, I should become the strongest human in the world. But until then, I had to remain cautious and careful. Super skilled warriors like a Baron Martell still posed a threat to me, enough to perhaps kill me. Thankfully, nobody would recognize me even if they saw me, but Kinvera was another question. She had her hair red right now, so they wouldn't realize that this Red Priestess was the Red Priestess, but still. It was better to be careful since these lands worship the Seven. Tension lay heavy on our small company now. We were passing through the Stormlands, after all. The territory of one of the 5 kings, who was just nearby. So the sand snakes were ever alert while Kinvera smiled to herself as though she were above it all, and as for me, well, I kept my composure. Each passing day brought us closer to the Lion's Maw, a place where allegiances were as solid as smoke and just as reliable. It was far ahead of Summerhall when the encounter happened. The sudden sound of horse hooves, many, many hooves, echoed across the rolling hills. A heralding beat that pulled our attention in unison. Horses, Kinvera said softly, her tone a strange tune of curiosity. The sand snakes were already moving, hands resting on the hilts of weapons, expressions darkening. I pulled my horse to a stop, eyes narrowing, as I positioned myself in front of Kinvera as if to protect her. The banners came into view before the horses did, the golden rose of House Tyrell beside the stag crowned in gold, the banner of House Baratheon. Stay alert, I said to the girls, although that wasn't needed. They already were, as the riders spread out as they drew nearer, a formation too neat to be anything but military. They circled us smoothly, not entirely hostile but certainly not friendly. Renly Baratheon sat astride a massive warhorse at the head of the company, wearing a crown of golden antlers upon his head, his easy smile a mask of charm. Beside him, on a slimmer palfrey, rode a beautiful woman. I recognized her as Margaery Tyrell, and like Renly, she was a more attractive mirror of her TV show counterpart. Her gaze was sharp beneath the pretense of politeness. The knights fanned out around them, each of them in glittering armor, the sheen of polished steel almost blinding under the sun. Curious, what have we here? Renly called out, his voice carrying over the distance. He didn't sound like he intended to harm us. He urged his horse forward, closing the space between us. Interesting travelers through my lands. Don't be startled. I simply want to know who exactly crossed my path today. Renly Baratheon, one of the 5 kings, the king of the Stormlands, swept his eyes across us, lingering on the crimson robes and hair of Kinvera and then the dark-haired sand snakes. He barely shot me a look, which I was thankful for. I had my hair black from Kinvera's magic, so it wasn't as if he could recognize me anyway. However, it wasn't as if we were totally safe either. This Kinvera refused to change her robes, so it was hard to hide her status as a Red Priestess. Stannis Baratheon was being helped by a Red Priestess, and if Renly knew about it, he'd automatically view us as enemies. The sand snakes stiffened, fingers tightening on their weapons. I held up a hand, a signal to keep their blades sheathed, for now. Just travelers, my lord, I replied, keeping my tone smooth, almost bored. Passing through, on our way to the capital. It's your grace, said a knight who was riding too close to Renly. Although he wore a helmet, I recognized him as the Knight of Flowers. I smirked. Ah, yes, I apologize, your grace. Renly's eyes flicked from Kinvera to me, the faintest quirk of his lips betraying his interest. Such brave people you are, he said, his gaze returning to Kinvera. A Red Priestess. His eyes lingered on her, as did the eyes of many others. Nobody, not even Renly and Loris, could deny her beauty. Image here. Renly nodded his head in respect. My lady, I am assuming when he said he's going to the capital, he and the daughters of Prince Aberon are accompanying you to the capital. Should I be worried about the Lord of Light setting his sights on my camp? From the looks of it, news of Melisandre the priestess supporting Stannis hadn't spread across the land yet. Otherwise, he'd have been a lot more aggressive to us. Or maybe it was the daughters of Aberon Martell, as they somehow recognized them, that secured safety for us just by being here. Kinvara revealed a soft, composed smile, the one that spoke of secrets and power. The Lord of Light seeks only to bring his warmth, my lord, she said, her voice honeyed. No harm shall come to those who respect his grace. Only those who disrespect the one God, no matter if king or peasant, will be judged. I am Nyra, a close confidant of Kinvara, the Heart of Fire. So please rest assured, someone like me is not in allegiance with any of the 5 kings. She didn't lie. I wasn't one of the 5 kings. I'm simply having a pilgrimage to King's Landing in the hope of spreading the Lord's name. Ah, Grace, Renly repeated, his tone laced with a teasing note. He glanced sideways at Marjorie. Grace is a currency we often run short of, isn't it, my love? Marjorie gave a delicate laugh, her eyes sharp as they studied Kinvara. Perhaps, but I don't think I've ever seen a priestess quite like you, she said, her gaze dipping to the embroidered flames on Kinvara's robes. The gorgeous Queen of Ashes smiled. Such fervor even when you're standing before the rightful king. Image here. Kinvara bowed her head, her smile deepening. Faith is powerful indeed, your grace. It touches even those who resist it. Like this young man, for example, she raised a hand at me. One of the second sons. Doesn't believe in the Red God, even if he acts otherwise with me, and yet he's sticking with me. Isn't that what faith is? I winced, not that surprised that she knew my true feelings toward this so-called God. Thankfully, it didn't seem to change her goal with me. Marjorie's eyes met mine then, and I held her gaze. Her smile was kind, almost too kind. I wondered if she could see through the guise, if she noticed the mask beneath which lay something entirely different. Of course, that was impossible. If this greedy woman knew I was a Targaryen, she'd have run from Renly and jumped on my horse instead. There was a sharpness in her eyes, a calculating look that reminded me of a cat toying with a bird. She knew we were more than what we claimed, or at least suspected it. Renly turned his attention to me, his easy smile unwavering. And you seem more than a simple bodyguard. What brings you to Westeros, my good man? I returned his smile, careful not to let the annoyance show. I didn't respect him. He was weak, a pretender with dreams beyond his reach. But he was powerful enough, at this moment, to become an obstacle. The Red Priestess travels where she's needed. I'm simply here to see her safely to her destination. Don't ask me why I'm here. Ask my captain, Dario Naharis, why he wants me to protect this pretentious woman. Kinvara raised an eyebrow at me, but I just ignored her. As far as she was concerned, I was just playing a character. A noble cause, Renly mused, though his eyes said otherwise. And a dangerous road. These lands aren't as peaceful as they once were. We're prepared for whatever may come, I said, my gaze steady. Beside me, I could feel the quiet readiness of the sand snakes, their eyes locked on Renly's knights. Marjorie's voice slipped into the conversation, soft. You should join us, if only for a night. We're camped not far from here. I'm sure we could all benefit from a bit of company. The roads are lonely, after all. I smiled politely. Gracious, but no, we're on a tight schedule, I'm afraid. Renly raised an eyebrow. So quick to move on, and yet you've nowhere pressing to be. Curious. The Lord's work is ever pressing, Kinvara interjected smoothly, her tone unwavering. We appreciate the offer, my lord. But we must keep moving. Time is short, and the light must reach those who need it most. Renly watched her for a moment, his smile remaining though the curiosity in his eyes sharpened. He nodded slowly. Very well, I won't hold you. But beware, the path ahead grows darker. Friends may turn into enemies when least expected. His gaze held mine, the words hanging in the air like a veiled warning. Wise words, my lord, I said. Perhaps we'll meet again under different circumstances, I said, but my eyes were now on Marjorie. Perhaps, Renly echoed before pulling the reins of his horse and turning back to his camp. Safe travels, priestess, and remember, King Renly always appreciates those who recognize true kingship when they see it. We shall meet again when I take King's Landing. He smiled, and then they were gone, the thunder of hooves fading into the distance. I waited until they were well out of earshot before glancing toward Kinvara. Take King's Landing, he says, I muttered, loosening the annoyed grip I hadn't realized I still held on my horse's reins. Kinvara's smile was unfaltering. An ambitious man, a kind one too. Unfortunately, I don't think he's powerful enough. But this encounter did go better than expected. The Lord of Light guides us well, my prince. Trust in his flame. Yes, yes, I said dismissively, turning my horse toward the direction we were heading. North, toward King's Landing. Let's keep moving. The sand snakes exchanged glances, Tyene scoffing softly under her breath. I didn't bother asking what she thought. But as we rode on, the golden fields stretching before us, I felt the tension ease. We were close. 18 Red Priestess in King's Landing. Chapter 18. Red Priestess in King's Landing. The small council chamber of the Red Keep felt like a tomb. Shadows clung to the stone walls, flickering candles in wrought iron holders doing little to chase them away. The long table gleamed beneath the faint, muted light seeping through narrow windows that were shut tight against the city beyond. The air was thick with unspoken ambition and carefully veiled contempt, a suffocating atmosphere that mirrored the kingdom itself. At the head of the table, Varys folded a parchment with practiced calm. His soft, unhurried voice broke the tension as his gaze settled on Queen Cersei. Your father, your grace, he said, his tone as neutral as his expression, has named Lord Tyrion to serve as hand in his stead while he fights. The room froze for a beat. Then came the crack. Cersei's palm slammed against the table with enough force to rattle the wine goblets. The pale skin of her face flushed an angry red, and her lips curled into something vicious. Out, she barked, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. All of you, out. The members of the small council didn't hesitate. Chairs scraped against stone as they rose, their movements brisk and deliberate. Eyes remained averted, bodies stiff with the instinct of prey. Varys glided out silently, while Pycelle shuffled after him, his robes dragging against the floor in a mournful whisper. The door thudded shut, leaving only two behind. Tyrion didn't move. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers curled around the stem of his wine glass. He swirled the dark liquid, the smirk on his lips deepening as he watched his sister from across the table. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Cersei's heels clicked sharply against the stone as she strode toward him. Her golden hair framed her face like a halo of fury, and her eyes burned with venom. She leaned in close, her shadow falling across his face, sharpening her features into something dangerous. How? She hissed. Her voice trembled with barely restrained rage. How did you trick father into this? Tyrion tilted his head, a chuckle rumbling low in his chest. Dear sister, he drawled, his tone laced with mockery, if I were capable of tricking father, I'd already be emperor of the world. For a heartbeat, he thought she might slap him. Her hand twitched, but instead, she straightened, her jaw tight as steel. He must have lost his senses, she spat, her words clipped and bitter. To give you that chair, that title. Or, Tyrion said, his voice light, perhaps he's grown tired of your particular style of leadership. He raised his glass, his smirk deepening as her jaw clenched. Let's call it a fresh perspective. Her fists tightened, and the fury in her eyes flared hotter. You think this is a game, don't you? She snapped, sitting in that chair, playing hand. You're no hand, you're a joke. A little jester in a big chair. Tyrion shrugged, his gaze growing sharper. Maybe, he said, but this jester might just bring your darling Jaime back. Her eyes widened, just a flicker of surprise, quickly masked. Quote. How? She demanded, her voice quieter now, tinged with doubt. The Starks love their children, Tyrion said smoothly, leaning back as if savoring his words. And we have one of theirs. Only one, Cersei corrected, her tone brittle. He frowned, his smirk faltering. One. Arya is missing, she said, the bitterness returning to her voice. Gone. Vanished. That little wolf slipped through our grasp. Tyrion swirled his wine, his brow furrowing. But Sansa remains. Engaged to Joffrey, she snapped. Her lips curled into something cold, and for a moment, her gaze wavered with frustration. Tyrion chuckled softly, shaking his head as if pitying her. It must be hard, he murmured, his voice a low, mocking drawl. Being the disappointing child. Her expression flickered, just for a moment. A shadow of something raw passed over her face, almost too quick to catch. Then her features hardened, and she turned away, her hands clenched at her sides. "Since you're the hand of the king," she said abruptly, her voice sharp with forced calm, "I have a task for you." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "I don't take tasks from you." Her smile widened, icy and brittle. "Oh, but you'll want to." She turned to face him again, her tone laced with venomous sweetness. "Not long ago, a red priestess came to King's Landing. The High Septon wants her dealt with before she spreads her poison. Especially since Stannis Baratheon is said to be receiving advice from a red priestess himself. So go, dear brother. Play the hand." Tyrion stared at her, his expression unreadable. Their silence was tight, stretched thin with unspoken hostility. Finally, he sighed, setting his goblet down with exaggerated weariness. "Fine," he muttered, "I'll deal with your little problem." He rose from his chair, his movements deliberate, and gave her a curt nod before turning to leave. "Good luck, little brother," she called after him, her voice a venomous purr. The heavy door shut behind him, cutting off the sound of her laughter like the lid of a coffin sealing shut. Thank you, priestess. Praise to the Lord of Light, thank you," a mother said, holding her child close. The boy, who just days ago had lain pale and listless, now clung to his mother with rosy cheeks and newfound strength. The door to the small mansion creaked as she stepped outside, her grateful smile disappearing behind it. I sighed. "I thought you weren't going to collect servants and followers," I said, turning my gaze toward Kinvara, who was still gazing at the door as if she could still feel the gratitude of that mother. Kinvara smiled, a soft curve of her lips that held a glimmer of mischief. "I'm not collecting followers," she replied, finally shifting her gaze to me. "I'm just helping the needy. It pains me to see them sick, Viserys. I can't help it." I met her eyes for a moment, holding back the words that rose to my lips. Kinvara had that talent, turning any situation to her favor. The delicate line between genuine care and sly manipulation blurred when it came to her. Just 3 days was all it had taken for her to find herself a place among these desperate souls. And now, thanks to her miracles, I was practically trapped inside this rented mansion. Since I couldn't be sure of how to approach my next plans without being sure how the rulers of this city will react to her actions. "If you miraculously heal a child," I muttered, settling back in the soft chair near the window, "more mothers will come the next day." "Are you planning to build a kingdom where mothers don't want their children to be healthy, my king?" Kinvara's eyebrow arched in that infuriating way of hers, her lips tugging upward. "Stop twisting my words," I shot back, irritated. "Things like this will catch the attention of unwanted people for no reason." She giggled, an almost melodic sound that rang with her usual confidence. "Trust me, whoever this will catch the attention of will not be unwanted. Plus, we got ourselves a mansion by saving people, didn't we?" She gestured around us with a flourish. "Be grateful we're sleeping under a roof, my prince." I bit back another sigh, letting my gaze drift to the other side of the room. There, the sand snakes were seated, sharpening their weapons with casual expertise. Tyene Sand, with her short cropped hair and deceptively sweet smile, looked up from her dagger with an unimpressed scoff. "If you truly are serving him, you should listen to what he orders." "No." Kinvara's smile never wavered. She turned, her red locks catching the candlelight, glimmering like fire. "The only one I serve is the Lord of Light, my dear. Although, yes, as Azor Ahai, I do serve him too. My job, however, as I see it, is to guide him. Not to follow his wishes blindly, like some, certain people." It was clear who she meant. The room suddenly felt colder. The tension rippled between them, the air almost crackling with Tyene's glare and Kinvara's ever-present smile. The scrape of metal against whetstone paused momentarily, then resumed, more aggressive than before. Tyene's eyes remained on Kinvara, a glint of challenge flickering within them. I clapped my hands, the sound breaking through the strained silence. "All right, girls, I'm not having any of this tension between my own people," I said. "Especially because I valued the red-haired woman far more than these girls. I was just complaining for the sake of it. It's not as if this is disrupting any actual plans. We'll just figure out some other way to enter the castle." The sand snakes exchanged glances before shrugging and looking away, dismissing the tension as if it were nothing more than a fleeting annoyance. Kinvara scoffed softly, standing up and making her way to the door. She reached for the handle, ready to close it against the world outside. MMH. But then the door swung open before her hand could touch the wood. Two men entered the mansion. One of them was short and stout, a dwarf with a distinct halo of wild blonde curls surrounding his head, while the other carried a sword at his hip, his gait lazy and confident. Tyrion Lannister, a face even an exile like me could recognize, followed by a sellsword I recognized from the TV show. Bronn, the Lucky. I stood up from my chair, walked over to Kinvara, and positioned myself beside her, my hand resting lightly on the hilt of my blade. I gave Tyrion a thin smile. "Welcome, guests. Unfortunately, our priestess here doesn't have a cure for dwarfism," I said dryly. Tyrion blinked, staring at me for a heartbeat before snapping a finger at me. "That was actually funny," he admitted, smirking, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Considering you clearly realize I'm not here for that. Were you seeing patients?" He turned to Kinvara. "Yes," Kinvara replied, her expression softening into her usual practiced warmth. "And forgive my bodyguard's rash words. Growing up with the second sons molded him this way." She shot me a quick, irritated look, a look that was as much for show as her soft tone. Tyrion shifted his weight, studying her for a moment. "So, what can I help you with, Lord Tyrion Lannister?" Kinvara asked. "Ah, so you do know me." Tyrion smiled, though the smile was tinged with something sharper, curiosity, perhaps, or skepticism. How do I say this? I've recently been appointed as the Hand of the King, a hefty job, and I've been asking around about a red priestess who seemed to have made herself at home in King's Landing. Naturally, I had to come to see for myself." He gave a sweeping bow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now that I have, I'd ask you to leave." Kinvara tilted her head, a glimmer of sadness in her gaze. "Because of my religion, I thought Westeros, under King Robert Baratheon's rule, allowed all kinds of religions to coexist. Is King Joffrey restricting that right now? Pity." Tyrion hesitated, his mouth opening and closing for a second before he hummed. Well, no, but, Kinvara shook her head. "The High Priestess Kinvara sent me here. She'd be immensely disappointed to hear the Church of Light has been banished from Westeros." "Kinvara," Bronn piped up, his eyes narrowing. "Of Volantis." The mention of the name seemed to settle between them like a rock in a calm pond, ripples of understanding spreading in their expressions. "Yes," she said, "my name is Nyra, one of her close confidants." Kinvara had taken precautions, her hair dyed red with a speck of her magic, her identity hidden beneath layers of deception. She played her part well, pretending to be someone else, presenting herself as one of the many priestesses under Kinvara's guidance. Using her own identity would draw too much attention. I turned away, my hand lifting in a dismissive gesture. "Looks like we have to pack," I said with an exaggerated sigh. "Wait," Tyrion called, his voice halting my steps. "I've heard about the High Priestess before. Quite an enigma, isn't she? Since she, the first priestess of the Lord of Light, has sent you here, let's see. What crimes have you committed again?" Kinvara's smile deepened, her eyes almost twinkling. "None," she said softly. "Unless checking on sick children is considered a crime." Tyrion Lannister regarded her for a long moment before he smiled, a smile laced with resignation. "No, it's not." He gave a curt nod. "Have a good day, then." And with that, he turned, Bronn following closely behind, and they were gone, just like that. I looked at their receding back, and smirked. My gaze swept over Kinvara, her composed expression a mask of victory. "So this is what you meant." Could be a coincidence," she said, and I crossed my arms. "Right, well, now my identity is clear to the higher-ups in King's Landing. A simple bodyguard of the Second Sons, serving a red priestess. Not a bad cover. I should be able to visit the brothel at least now freely." Kinvara tilted her head, the mischief returning to her eyes. "Hey, step by step, my prince. Trust in the Lord of Light." I ignored her blabbering and glanced out of the window, the skyline of King's Landing stretching in the distance, a sight that called out to me. Author note: need some stones for Viserion, she dying hungry. 27 comments 0 vote. 19 Seduction Arts on a Whore. Chapter 19. Seduction Arts on a Whore. The narrow alleys of King's Landing were like a maze. It was a claustrophobic warren of stone, grime, and the combined stink of humanity. It was honestly gross. Do I really want this place back? Yikes. The smell was unbearable. Fortunately, it did have an end. I walked through them with my hood pulled low as I navigated the twisting streets away from the smell. This was far different than Volantis, at least on the part I'd visited. The sights of this city, ancient and medieval, were fascinating. Structures like this I'd only seen in pictures, and heavy CGI works. Dirty cobblestones beneath my boots, wooden beams that jutted out from the upper floors of buildings to create strange, leaning streets, all of that was a strange wonder to my modern mind, even with Visory's memories. The city stank of unwashed bodies and rot, with every corner harboring dark, unknown filth. Yet there was life here, too. The poor, the rich, the beggars, and the lords. All lives that'd one day belong under my foot, soon. I turned down another alley, the din of the marketplace fading behind me as I approached my destination, Littlefinger's brothel. It was evening. The sun had set halfway, and the moon was visible. People were starting to buzz around the place. There was something darkly amusing about all this as I stood under the shadow of the building, smiling up at it. Here I was, Viserys Targaryen, the last of a fallen dynasty, entering the lair of a man who was meant to be a major character in a story I had once watched on a screen. With intentions to reclaim the dynasty. The revival of my kingdom is starting from a brothel. I shook my head. The door opened with a groan as I stepped inside. Immediately, the heavy, musky perfume of the place wrapped around me, an overpowering blend of sweat, floral oils, and the faintest hint of incense. Girls of all types lounged around, laughing and talking, their voices merging into a soft, constant hum. I strode to the center of the room, avoiding bumping into people, while my eyes trailed lazily across the offerings. The madam on duty was a stout woman with heavily painted lips, who approached me, her smile practiced and smooth. "Welcome, my lord," she purred. "What might you be in the mood for?" "The best girl you have," I asked simply, watching the room. The madam's eyebrows rose, and there was a moment of silence before a young girl, a blonde no older than 20, giggled softly. "Can you even pay for the best?" she said, her tone half teasing, half skeptical, given my choice of clothes. I couldn't reply as a sharp slap cracked through the room. The madam had moved so fast that even I almost missed it. The young blonde gasped, clutching her cheek, eyes wide as the madam rounded on her, her gaze like steel. "Mind your manners," she snapped before turning back to me, all smiles again. The girls began to move closer, surrounding me in a swirl of scents and fabrics. "There's no one best, my lord," the madam said smoothly, gesturing to the array before me. "All are worthy. Do you like blondes, redheads, something petite, perhaps? I can find the best of your taste." Hands reached for me, delicate fingers brushing my arms and chest as if to draw my attention. I observed their curves, groping their breasts. "Tall girls, short ones," one of them said, her eyes gleaming. "You'll find what you need here." "Will I, really?" Of course, I wasn't here to get my dick wet. I had Kinvera for that. This was a strategic visit. I was here for someone, and as I glanced around, scanning the faces, I soon found her, a girl sitting by the far side of the room. She was different from the rest. I bet on any other day, she'd have acted the same as them, but today she wasn't trying to catch my eye. She wasn't even looking this way, too dazed as she was tying her auburn hair back. Rose the whore. I remembered her from the show, though now she looked softer and more fragile, as well as prettier, her face unlined by the cruelties that would one day come her way. How beautiful for a whore, I had to admit. Image here. I raised my head, nodding in her direction, and felt the collective sigh of several girls around me, a soft, near imperceptible sound of disappointment. The madam hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Rose, then back to me. "Ah, well. My lord," the blonde girl from earlier began, her voice almost pleading, "Rose isn't feeling well today. Perhaps another." Before she could continue, Rose's voice cut through the murmurs. "I'm fine, Lyris," she said, standing, her face expressionless. She stepped forward, her posture straight. Her body was great, and her eyes locked on mine with a quiet defiance. "I'll take the job." The madam gave her a wary look but said nothing. I held back a smile, merely nodding, allowing her to lead the way. Rose moved ahead, her steps steady, her hand gesturing for me to follow her up the winding staircase that led to the private chambers. I followed, the other girls parting for us, their eyes following our ascent, a mix of curiosity, envy, and perhaps even pity. Rose led me down a narrow hallway, opened a door to one of the rooms, and stepped aside for me to enter first. The door closed softly behind us, and the night in the city waited just beyond. ***. So what would you like to start with, Esser? Rose asked, her voice smooth and practiced, leading me inside the room. She gently nudged me onto the bed, her movements deliberate, her demeanor polished with years of experience. The room smelled faintly of incense, a thick sweetness that attempted to disguise the musty undertone of too many bodies passing through. The bed, with its rich crimson drapes and silken sheets, looked inviting but somehow hollow, like all things gilded and hollowed out with use. Flickering candles in the corners threw shadows that danced across the stone walls, casting a certain warmth that wasn't truly there, a place where charm and emptiness went hand in hand. Rose was smiling now, and to most, it would look sincere. But it was hard to act in front of me. My stats, and perhaps just my experience, made it almost amusingly easy to see the edges of her weariness. She wore more makeup today than I imagined she normally would. A bit of powder under her eyes, too much kohl to hide what lay beneath. A swelling, the kind that came from tears shed not too long ago. I had heard the news of Joffrey's latest cruelty while wandering the city earlier, the slaughter of bastards, the senseless killing of children, of mothers left wailing in the streets. It wasn't hard to recall the scene where Rose cried over one of those unfortunate babies, a friend's child. Just like in the show. And Petter Baelish, well, he hadn't made it any easier. This is good, I thought, the timing is just perfect. Holding back a smile, I corrected her. I'm no Esser, I said. What do you usually do for your customers? All right, crazy question, how do you seduce a whore? Author note. This is a tribute to Rose. I liked her character a lot, and she didn't deserve her end. We'll be focusing on some influence-building chapters from here on out, which might feel slow but necessary for the story. This is not a go kill king, take throne story, after all. But we'll focus on the action soon again. Vote Power Stones. 20 comments 0 vote. 20 Spreading a Network. Chapter 20. Spreading a Network. I'm no Esser, I said. What do you usually do for your customers? She blinked, her smile widening, her eyes flashing briefly with something sly. Ah, you're the talking type, she giggled. It was a fake, airy sound, the kind meant to charm a stranger. Well, usually I start by. She leaned closer, whispering a litany of acts, her tone dripping with the seductive allure she was famous for. I laughed softly, letting the sound drift between us, the echo swallowed by the walls. Sounds fun, I said, sliding my hands away from her waist, my fingers brushing the silk of her dress as I let go. But, tonight, I think I'll take you for the whole night, Rose. My words made her eyes light up briefly with hope. But first, I want to talk. Get to know each other. It's dull to just fucking leave, isn't it? She stilled, her gaze lingering on my face as if trying to gauge my intentions. She tried to hide it, but the flicker of irritation was unmistakable. She wanted to get this over with. Trust me, love, the night will be far from boring, she purred. I laughed again, louder this time. If all I wanted was a quick drain of balls, Rose, I'd have done it with my hand in the privacy of my own quarters. I came here to find a woman for a reason. Women are charming, they're more than just bodies. They're stories. They're someone to brag to laugh with. Sex is just a fraction of that. She giggled, something real slipping into the sound. So you want to brag about yourself? Go on then, traveler, she said, her head tilting as her smile turned teasing. You're not from here, are you? I nodded, sharp eyes. A necessity in my line of work, she replied, arching an eyebrow. Her gaze carried a hint of mischief, her curiosity piqued despite herself. I leaned back, making myself comfortable, one arm resting behind my head. Yep, from Essos actually, I said and launched into my story, spinning a web of half-truths and careful lies, how I was part of the Second Sons, which she didn't know about, so I had to explain how companies of sellswords worked in Essos, and how the Second Sons was a big name among them. I told her why I was here, that I'd passed through Dorne earlier, traveling alongside a rather fervent Red Priestess. She's good at ruining the mood, I added with a grin. When all a man wants is to have his balls empty and a night to himself, she's there talking about some Lord of Light. Rose giggle interrupted my story, it was a sound more real than before. I can imagine, a priestess isn't exactly who a man like you would want to travel with, is it? No, I said, sighing dramatically. I wanted to sleep with her once, but, I paused, my lips quirking upward. Apparently, Fire isn't just metaphorical. She laughed out loud, her head falling back, her eyes crinkling in amusement. The tension she carried seemed to dissolve with each shared laugh, each joke exchanged. Her earlier impatience had faded entirely, and her body had lost the stiffness from before. She rested her head on my arm, her red curls brushing against my skin as she nestled closer, her body relaxed against mine. I could feel her breaths evening, her laughter still lingering. So, she murmured, her fingers trailing down my chest, how about you show me the dragon in your pants, Her hand slipped lower, but I caught her wrist, stopping her. Her gaze darted up, confusion sparking in her eyes. You want to talk even more? It's been hours. And the night is far from done, I replied, my tone light. I let my fingers trace her wrist, my eyes holding hers. Besides, I've been the one talking all this time. I want to hear about you, Rose. It'd be dull to just fuck after talking so much about me, especially with someone like you. Tell me, what's been weighing on you? Why were you sad earlier? She blinked, the smile on her lips faltering, her expression hardening slightly. Ah, traveler, if you're not in the mood, I can call someone else. No, I said quickly, cutting her off. I'm in the mood for you. You're gorgeous, but more than that, I want to understand why the woman I'm going to spend the night with is sad. What happened? She frowned, her eyes narrowing at me, and then she grinned. It was a cynical grin that barely hid the bitterness underneath. Oh, I see, you're into that, aren't you? She said, her voice dropping, a mocking edge creeping into her tone. You want the sad story of the whore, so you can feel like a hero when you fuck her, thinking, oh, how great I am, making this broken woman smile and moan again. Is that it? Her words hung in the air, biting, the bitterness sharp enough to cut. Her eyes widened as she realized what she'd just said, the venom she'd let slip. She tried to pull away, her body stiffening, but I burst out laughing, a genuine, full-bodied laugh that filled the space between us, diffusing the tension. Rose stilled, staring at me, then hesitated before a small smile crept onto her lips, growing into laughter of her own. She shook her head, her laugh growing freer. I pulled her, and she rolled with me on the bed, her laughter infectious, carrying away the sharpness of her words. Ah, you do have a way with words, I sighed, the laughter fading from my lips as I sat up, reaching into my coat. I pulled out a small pouch, tossing it beside her. It landed on the mattress with a soft jingle. She blinked, her gaze flicking to the pouch before back to me. I nudged my chin toward it, and she hesitated before reaching for it, her fingers loosening the strings. Her eyes widened at the amount inside, more than any single night was worth. She looked up at me, surprise written across her face. Your payment, I said, my voice softening. For tonight, let's suppose we've already slept together. Now, entertain me with your story, Rose. Why is such a pretty face like yours sad, yet still forced to work? She stared at me for a long moment, her expression softening, her eyes shimmering with something unspoken. She sighed, sitting up, her gaze drifting down to her hands. You said you're from Essos, right? She began, her voice quieter now, almost unsure. Fair, why you won't know. Yes, I've only been in King's Landing for a little while, I said, lying on my side, my eyes never leaving hers. What happened here, Rose? What's got you like this? She hesitated, biting her lip, her eyes flicking away. It's the crown, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The crown's ordered, they've been killing all of Robert Baratheon's bastards. She paused, her gaze lowering, her voice breaking slightly. My friend, Hagen, her baby, it wasn't even his. She'd never been with the king. But they killed him anyway. They killed so many babies, innocent children, just because they might be his. Her voice cracked, her eyes filling with tears, her breath shuddering as she spoke. I sat up, reaching out, my hand running gently through her hair, my other arm pulling her closer. She looked up, startled at the gesture, her eyes wide, her tears spilling over. I didn't say anything, just held her, her trembling form pressed against me as her sobs finally broke free. She cried against my chest, her body trembling with the force of her grief. They dove a dagger through the poor baby's heart, for nothing, she whispered, her voice muffled against my shirt. And now I'm here, pretending everything is fine, working like it's just another day. The man who runs this place, he's got to be a piece of shit, making you work like this, I muttered, my voice darkening. She froze, her body tensing against me. She hesitated, pulling back slightly, her gaze flicking up to mine, a conflicted look in her eyes. She shook her head, her voice wavering. He's not a bad man. He's done a lot for me, for all of us. She was lying. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in the way her voice wavered. But I liked that about her. She was smart, cautious, unwilling to speak ill of Baelish to a stranger. That was why I was here tonight, not to claim her body, but her loyalty, to make her a seed, someone I could trust, someone who could become my eyes and ears against Littlefinger and the rest of King's Landing. If he's so kind, I said, my voice soft, why not stop working here? Become his assistant, or a manager, or something. Surely, you're capable of more than this. She hesitated, her brow furrowing, her gaze dropping. You think someone like me could do that? She murmured, her voice almost lost to the shadows. I reached up, ruffling her hair gently, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. You're stronger than you think, Rose. You could have let those girls take me, avoided working tonight, but you didn't. You have ambition, you should use it. She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering, her lips parting slightly. You really think? At least try, I said, smiling. I think you can do it. She blinked, her eyes softening, her lips curling into a hesitant smile. Sure. And don't worry about anyone else coming for you for the next few days, I added, lying back on the bed, pulling her down beside me. I'll come here every night. I'll hire you, and we can just talk. You can work on becoming his assistant during the day, and at night, I'll be here, keeping everyone else away. Sound good? She stared at me, her eyes wide, her lips parting, then she smiled, a real, soft smile, one that reached her eyes. You're a strange man, she whispered, her voice filled with something I couldn't quite place. She nudged closer, resting her head against my chest, her body relaxing against mine. Maybe, I said, wrapping an arm around her, my gaze drifting to the ceiling, a smirk tugging at my lips. At this rate, I'd have her loyalty soon enough. But for now, sleep, Rose. I'll take care of it if someone looks for you, and everything else. She sighed softly, her body sinking into mine, her breaths evening out as she drifted to sleep, her warmth seeping into me. I lay there, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, my smirk widening. I guess this was a step towards the beginning of my own personal spy network. 21. A Hopeless Romantic. Chapter 21. A Hopeless Romantic. The light came in softly through the small window, muted by the dust that clung to the glass. It was morning. Rose blinked against the thin, gray dawn, her senses slowly coming to life. There was warmth beneath her, a lingering heat where his body had been. She sat up, the sheets slipping away, her hand brushing across the empty space beside her. He was gone. Of course, he was. What did you expect, Rose? She thought, the corners of her mouth twitching into a small, sad smile. She wasn't surprised. Men like him, rare, strange, kind, they never stayed. Especially not in places like this. Still, despite herself, she found her eyes roaming across the room, glancing at the shadows where the early light had yet to reach. The dim corners were empty. She sighed and let her shoulders slump, bringing her palm up to meet her forehead in a slow, tired slap. I didn't even ask his name, she muttered, a sigh escaping her lips. A part of her hated herself for even caring. He was a customer, after all, just another man with coins in his pouch. Yet, it didn't feel like that, did it? Her mind whispered back, and she had no answer. No answer except the quiet ache in her chest, an emptiness that hadn't been there when she drifted off, wrapped in his warmth. Outside the door, life was already picking up. The clamor of voices, the shuffle of feet on worn wooden floors, the madam's sharp bark as she wrangled the morning shift. Rose rubbed at her eyes, trying to shake off the heaviness that clung to her limbs. Life was calling her back, as it always did, pulling her from the warmth of that fleeting moment into the cold, indifferent reality of King's Landing. She glanced back at the empty side of the bed, her fingers curling into the sheets, feeling the slight indentation where he had been. A man like that, he was rare. She had never spent a night like that before, a night where there were no demands, no expectations, just laughter and stories shared between strangers. Compared to her usual nights, a night where she could simply be herself, where she could cry and laugh without the weight of performance, it had felt like heaven. Her fingers tightened on the sheets, and she bit her lip. Would he come back? He said he would, but men said a lot of things, didn't they? Promises whispered in the dark, forgotten by morning. She knew better than to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what got girls like her killed or worse, broken. And yet, she couldn't help it. There was something about him. Something that made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was different. She sighed, shaking her head, her auburn hair falling into her face as she tried to shake the thoughts away. Stupid girl, she chided herself, forcing her feet to the floor, the cold wood biting into her skin. You should know better by now. He probably won't come back. He probably forgot you the moment he walked out that door. She told herself that over and over, trying to bury the tiny flicker of hope that refused to die. But deep down, in the quiet part of her heart that still dared to dream, she wanted him to come back. She wanted another night like that, another chance to be just Rose, not Rose the whore, not the girl in the brothel, but just her. She stood, wrapping her arms around herself, staring at the door. The morning was waiting for her, and so was the world. Life was moving on, as it always did, dragging her along with it. But for a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to linger in the warmth of last night, the memory of heaven she had touched, however briefly, before she stepped back into the cold reality of her life. Don't be stupid, Rose, she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the noise outside. He's not coming back, but even as she said it, she couldn't quite convince herself. With one last glance at the empty bed, she turned away, the faintest of smiles tugging at her lips. Maybe he wouldn't come back. But maybe he would, and that tiny maybe, was enough to keep her going, enough to bring a spark of warmth to the cold morning as she opened the door and stepped back into the world. That night, he returned like a prince from her dreams. You know what, seducing a whore was surprisingly easy. Just give her something different than what the usual men gave them. Well, then again, that advice worked for all women, didn't it? Attention, care, the illusion of being seen, any woman was vulnerable to these if done just right. But anyhow, that wasn't the point. The last 2 weeks had slipped by, marked by my routine visits to the brothel. Each evening, I would return to her, hiring Rose for the entire night. The look in her eyes changed to more endearing after each visit. I honestly expected it to take longer since I wasn't some pickup artist back in my old world, and my system didn't have the charisma stat. But maybe the 20th made up for it. There had been some instances where the nobility of King's Landing had tried to compete, trying to outpay me for her services, but alas for them, I had the capital of Dornay behind me. No lord or knight was going to outbid me, not when I had the luxury of gold flowing like water from the sun-kissed deserts. Rose, meanwhile, had been working just as I had envisioned. Raising herself out of the rut that was being a simple whore, striving to become something more, someone more. In just these 2 weeks, she'd managed to position herself to be more than another warm body to be used by the patrons of Baelish's House of Sin. She'd been pushing herself, taking up tasks that weren't assigned to her, managing the other girls, helping with the paperwork, and being everywhere at once. And today, finally, she'd made real progress, promoted from a regular whore to a madam. Meaning, she didn't have to sleep with a customer if she didn't want to. This meant she was now in charge of others and able to delegate and command. She had power, a taste of it, and the hunger in her eyes told me she wanted more. And I would give it to her, slowly, like a piece of bait dangling just beyond reach, enticing her to keep striving forward. Hey, Rose's voice brought me out of my thoughts, a soft whimper near my ear as she lay beside me, her breath tickling my skin. She was lying on her side, her red hair spread across the pillow, her leg thrown over my hip, her lips brushing my ear. When are we actually doing it? I don't mind, you know. I glanced at her, a smile tugging at my lips. I told you, I said, shrugging, I'm not going to do it as long as it requires payment. She pouted, her brows furrowing. I told you I don't mind, she said, her voice a little husky, a little needy. I do, I replied, my tone light. Get more promoted, be fast about it, and then, I leaned over, brushing my nose against hers, feeling her breath hitch, I'll give you the dragon that you want. She giggled, biting her lip, her eyes glinting with mischief. You know, she said, her fingers trailing down my chest, I'd have thought you were limp down there if I hadn't felt that thing for myself with my hand. I can't wait to have that big boy. I laughed softly, shaking my head as her face moved closer, her lips parting. A kiss, at least, she whispered, her voice playful yet almost pleading. I nodded, and she wasted no time. Her hands cupped my face as she pulled me in, her lips crashing against mine, her kiss filled with hunger, a need that was as much about desire as it was about something deeper, something she likely didn't even realize she was yearning for. My hands wandered her body, tracing the curve of her waist, groping her ass, giving it a playful slap that made her moan into my mouth. She pulled back, her eyes darkened with lust, her voice husky as she asked, "You sure you don't want me bouncing on you already?" I grinned, lifting a finger and pressing it to her lips. "Be a good girl, be patient," I said. Her lips parted, and instead of replying, she took my finger into her mouth, her eyes locking onto mine as she began to suck on it, her tongue swirling around it. "Whatever you say, my love," she murmured around my finger, her voice muffled, her eyes never leaving mine. "Call me master," I corrected, my tone soft but firm. "I like that more." Her eyes widened for a brief moment before a grin spread across her lips, and she pulled my finger out of her mouth, her voice a purr as she said, "Sure thing, master." She leaned in again, kissing me once more, her body moving, grinding on top of me, her breath hitching as her hips moved, seeking friction. Morning came with a soft light filtering in through the curtains, the city outside beginning to wake. I stood at the edge of the bed, buttoning my shirt, my eyes flicking to the woman sprawled across the sheets, her hair a fiery halo against the pillow. Rose yawned, stretching, her eyes blinking open, still heavy with sleep. "You know," she murmured, her voice groggy, "you shouldn't come from tonight forward." I paused, raising an eyebrow at her, an amused smile playing on my lips. "Damn, you get a promotion and already discarding me." She scoffed, sitting up, her eyes rolling. "You know it's not like that," she said, pulling the sheet around her bare shoulders. "The deal was you'd come every night to hire me so other men couldn't. But now that I'm a madam, I can ignore others' requests on my own. I don't want you wasting your time on me. I know you're a busy man." She looked at me strangely for a moment and then joked, "Plus, you have those sand girls to seduce," she giggled before growing serious again. "Anyway, if you don't come, I can spend that time working, speeding up my promotions." "Not a bad plan." She hesitated then, her eyes flicking down, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the sheet. "Once that's done, we could go out for dinner, maybe. One day." Her voice was quiet, almost shy, as she glanced up at me through her lashes. I looked at her for a moment, her uncertainty almost endearing, and then smiled. "Of course, my dear," I said, my voice soft. Her face lit up, her lips curving into a smile that reached her eyes, and I felt a flicker of something almost like satisfaction. I leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, my fingers brushing through her hair. "Take care, Rose, and be smart. Remember what we talked about." She nodded, her eyes serious, her lips pressing into a determined line. "I will," she whispered. With one last glance, I turned, pulling my hood over my head as I stepped out of the room, the door clicking softly shut behind me. Another piece moved on the board, another step taken towards what was rightfully mine. Author note: sadly, yesterday's goal wasn't met. We can do a new goal today. If we cross a total of 500 Power Stones by the next 24 hours, I'll post 2 chapters at once. For reference, we're at 224 Power Stones right now. So 276 from here. Vote. 27 comments, 0 vote. 22. The Red Keep. Chapter 22. The Red Keep. Note: the goal met. So here's 2 chapters, enjoy. The narrow alleys of King's Landing twisted before me, the early morning light barely piercing the filth-ridden maze. My hood was pulled low, shadowing my face, but my spirits were light, lighter than they had been in a long while. The brothel, or rather, Rose, had proved useful. The city's grime, the stink of humanity mixed with rotting waste, all seemed less intrusive today, for my successes with her made me care less about everything else. I turned down a narrow street, the walls looming high on either side, the bricks stained dark by years of neglect. My feet carried me towards our small hideaway, a mansion tucked neatly into a forgotten corner of King's Landing, inconspicuous but comfortable. Well, for our purposes at least. We got it for free when Kinvera cured the sick child of a lord, and he gifted this place to stay, so I couldn't really complain. Even with Dornay backing me, I was mostly just a bum. As I neared, something caught my eye, a glint of polished metal, sunlight bouncing off the armor of several guards. Their uniforms were concerning with a stark blue and gold, the sigil of the crown emblazoned on their chests. Royal Guards. I felt a prickle of curiosity, raising an eyebrow as I watched them for a moment. What business do they have here? Tyrion had returned without issue, so why were these bastards at my doorstep? I pulled my hood tighter, slipping through the narrow side gate. The door was already open, the guard's presence weighing tension in the air. Inside, the hall was quiet, the flicker of sunlight throwing dancing shadows against the stone walls. I found Kinvara safe, draped in her crimson robes, her hair falling in waves, a soft smile playing at her lips. She looked regal as though she were a queen, far too used to these moments of power and pressure. Her gaze flickered to me, her eyes flashing with a mix of amusement and something else, a tension that buzzed beneath the surface. "Dearest bodyguard," she called. "You're awake early," I said, closing the door behind me, the wood groaning softly. My eyes drifted to the guards standing at attention, their hands resting loosely on the hilts of their swords. I assumed that the sand snakes were still asleep since they were not here. "The Queen Regent," Kinvara began, her voice smooth, as though she spoke of the weather, "has extended an invitation." She turned fully to face me, the fabric of her robes shifting around her like liquid fire. Or at least, that's what they called it. Calling it a summons seems more fitting. Cersei Lannister, I wondered, my curiosity piqued. Hey, does the Queen need guidance in the ways of fire and light? Kinvara's eyes sparkled with something close to mischief. She might be beyond the Lord's light, she murmured only loud enough for me to hear, but nonetheless, she demanded an audience. And I'm obliged to comply. Would you like to join me, Vis? The question was casual, her tone light, but it was a great opening. She knew I was looking for a way into the castle, and there were few ways better than this. I smiled, the answer forming before she had even finished speaking. Even if I wasn't your bodyguard, I'd never turn down an invitation to the Red Keep, I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. Especially not one that comes from the Queen herself. I thought you'd say that, she said softly, inclining her head towards the door where the guards waited. Let's go then. The Queen awaits, and we wouldn't want to keep her waiting. Follow us, one of the royal guards said. We moved together, the guards falling into step around us as we exited the mansion. The streets outside were slowly coming alive, vendors setting up stalls, children darting between them, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. We walked at a brisk pace, Kinvara's robes trailing behind her, her steps graceful, uncaring of the lustful gazes of the guards as their armor clinked softly in rhythm. The Red Keep loomed ahead, its towers piercing the sky, its walls casting long shadows over the bustling streets below. I stared at it for a moment. This was where my ancestor Aegon the Conqueror first landed and built his base, his son Maegor the Cruel saw it completed. The Red Keep was made by Targaryens for Targaryens, but most of all, it was my home. The guards led us through the gates, their expression stern. The atmosphere shifted as we entered the outer gates of the castle. It was a sudden quiet, the city's noise fading into a distant hum. The halls were cool, the air heavy with the scent of stone and torch smoke. I walked beside Kinvara, our escort of palace guards leading us deeper into the belly of the beast. I kept my hood low, my face hidden. It wasn't like anyone would recognize me anyway, but old habits die hard. On the other hand, Kinvara moved with an elegance that made her seem almost out of place in this grim stronghold, her robes flowing, her step light, her head held high. She looked as though she owned the place. In her mind, she probably did. And perhaps that was why the guards glanced at her with an odd mixture of awe and fear at the woman's confidence. Kinvara's presence drew eyes even among those accustomed to royalty, and her graceful smile was always on her lips. People looked at her, servants, members of high standing, lords that had come to visit the castle, and we ignored them all as we walked through halls that I'd dreamt of before. Halls I recognized from my childhood. We were soon brought to a grand door that looked designed to impress more than function simply. I didn't hate it, it was nostalgic. The Red Keep was as cold and uninviting as I remembered from my childhood, but at least it felt like home. I didn't feel like a trespasser. The last time I'd set foot here, I was 5, and it had already been 17 years. The guards paused, and one of them stepped forward, knocking briefly before pushing the door open. His voice echoed into the chamber beyond as he announced us. The Lady Nyra, priestess of R'hllor is here, Your Grace, he said, his tone dull. I caught a flicker of blonde hair through the gap of the door and green eyes flickering to look at us from inside. Invite her in, a feminine voice called, and the guard nodded. He then glanced at me and seemed to decide I didn't warrant any introduction. You heard her, the guard said, and Kinvera moved forward, her robe swaying, a smile playing on her lips. She shot me a brief glance before stepping through the doorway, her eyes flashing with something between amusement and tension. I'll be all right, no need to worry, she murmured in a low voice. Rather, try not to cause trouble today, she asked, and I gave her a long look. She knew why I'd chosen King's Landing rather than the other kings. I wanted to kill Joffrey. I just smirked at her words. No promises. She gave me a half-warning and half-amused look before she stepped through the door, the heavy wood closing behind her, leaving me in the hallway with the guard stationed nearby. The guard moved to close the door behind her, stepping in front of me as if to emphasize my lack of importance. You wait here, he said, barely glancing at me. His voice was gruff and dismissive. I shrugged, not bothering to argue. As you wish. I leaned back against the cool stone wall, my arms crossing over my chest as I looked around. The hall was grand, as one would expect of the Red Keep, but far too empty. I could hear distant voices, the muted clatter of movement deeper within. The boredom set in faster than expected. I glanced at the guards, both staring straight ahead, their faces expressionless. I shrugged, turning around. They didn't seem like they'd stop me, so there was no point standing around waiting, not when the Red Keep had so much to explore, so many secrets to uncover. And so many people to meet. I slipped away from the guards, my steps quiet against the stone floor, my curiosity pulling me deeper into the keep. This was an opportunity that I wasn't about to waste. 11 comments 0 vote. 23 Winter is coming, my lady. Chapter 23. Winter is coming, my lady. 17 years. That was how long it had been. For the first few minutes, I still couldn't believe I was walking through its halls again. Back then, I wasn't heir. It was Rhaegar, my older brother, who was the crown prince. No matter how much I bragged about it, I was never fated to inherit any of this. But now, I was working toward it. A few more, and I'll have it all back, I muttered to myself. I observed the area well, recalling the changes compared to when all of this belonged to my family. The winding and labyrinthine corridors seemed to swallow all warmth, shadows stretching out as if eager to consume those who dared to enter. The early morning light did little to penetrate the walls of red-painted stone, and the few torches flickering along the corridor were nothing more than trembling flames. The air was chill, the atmosphere charged. This was a place where whispers thrived and death came in silence. I walked slowly through these hallways, reaching out a hand to pluck an occasional flower or two from the garden that reached to this floor through the large windows. There was no rush, just a man stretching his legs, exploring the corners of a place that held far more secrets than most could fathom. The Red Keep was a maze. A place built on old, twisted bones, each corridor leading to more doors and secrets. I didn't know what I was looking for, but that was the fun. I was just wandering, searching for fate to hand me a situation on a platter. I moved lightly, avoiding the guards and their suspicious stares. My hood pulled low over my face, and the thick carpets beneath my feet muffled my steps. Turning another corner, I paused. My long walk finally came to an end. There, standing before one of the tall windows, her gaze fixed on the city below, was a lone figure. Her auburn hair caught the early light filtering through the dusty glass, glowing like fire. So many girls around me are redheads, I counted as I watched her. She was dressed in rich silks, deep greens and somber blues, the fabric hanging heavily, almost swallowing her tall frame. It took me a moment to recognize her. Sansa Stark, queen-to-be of Joffrey. I stepped closer, my steps slow. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes distant as they traced the skyline of King's Landing. I could almost see the turmoil in her, a thousand worries pressing on her shoulders, weighing her down, even in her stillness. I closed the distance, my lips quirking as I watched her. Very dangerous to stand so close to the window, I said, my voice cutting softly through the silence. She startled, her head snapping around, her eyes widening in surprise. Fear flickered across her features for a moment, a flash of vulnerability that was easy to read. The daughter of Eddard Stark, alone in the lion's den. She blinked at me, her gaze trying to make sense of my sudden appearance. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. You might fall, my lady, I added, keeping my tone light. Her voice came out in a soft breath, her words caught off guard. She straightened, stepping back from the window's ledge, her hands nervously smoothing the front of her dress. Who are you? I haven't seen you in the castle before. Just a visitor, I said, giving her a small nod. This is my name, I added after a pause. No titles, no introductions. Let her wonder who I was. And you must be Lady Sansa. She blinked, the wariness not entirely leaving her expression. How do you know my name? She asked, her voice soft, almost timid. That was a stupid question, but I just guessed she was startled. I smiled, stepping closer, my gaze flicking briefly to the window before returning to her. Everyone knows your name, my lady. You're quite famous, a Stark of Winterfell, here in King's Landing. I kept my voice smooth, my words gentle, as if I were offering her some small comfort. Her lips pressed together, her gaze dropping briefly to her hands. She was nervous, unsure of me. The girl was far from who she'd become one day, merely a step down a brat, but she was getting there. Also, she looked older. How could that be? In the show, the only reason her marriage with Joffrey was postponed was because she hadn't started to bleed yet. But here, she was definitely an adult already. Why was the marriage not held yet, then? You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. It's dangerous to talk to me. If what you'd come to the palace for is dealt with, leave. Dangerous, I echoed, my smile widening. For whom? Me, I laughed. She hesitated, her brow furrowing. For you, yes, if Jay the King finds you here. I waved a hand, dismissing her concern, my eyes glinting with amusement. I'll be fine, Lady Sansa. Besides, I rather enjoy the thrill of it. This place, I glanced around the dim corridor, the heavy stone walls, the tapestries lining the halls. It feels familiar, although I can't pinpoint why. If Eddard Stark was here, he'd have been able to answer that, I'm sure, I said, smirking at her as she frowned in confusion. I was just playing with her, but her eyes searched mine, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but she held back. I could see the questions in her, the curiosity, the uncertainty. She was wary of me, and yet, she was drawn in by what I was implying. That her father would recognize me if he was here. It wasn't often that someone approached her like this, with no clear agenda, no demands, just curiosity. You're not from here, are you? She finally said, her voice quiet. I smiled. Interesting question. Let's just say I'm passing through. I let my gaze drift back to her, my smile softening. And you, my lady, do you enjoy being here? In the heart of it all. You, who were so very excited to be queen when the prospect was first proposed. You, who begged your mother to convince your father to accept King Robert's deal. Quote. She hesitated, her eyes flicking away. It's not what I expected, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a sadness in her eyes, immense sadness. I am curious about who you are. Are you not going to answer? Today is not the day, my lady. As for your failed expectations, the Red Keep has that effect on people, I said, my tone shifting as if I were sharing a secret. It's not quite as grand as the stories make it out to be, is it? It's like a prison. She looked up at me, her eyes widening slightly, a flicker of something like agreement passing through them. For a moment, just a moment, she seemed to let her guard down, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. Quote. Yes, it's a prison, indeed. A rotten one. I laughed and blinked. My eyes glanced down the corridor. Footsteps, the heavy, deliberate tread of guards. I saw Kinvara walking with them, smiling calmly. Her talk with Cersei seemed to have gone without any issue, meaning my time here was up. I turned back to the older Sansa, giving her a small, charming smile, my gaze meeting hers. Take care, my lady, I said, my voice soft. Stay away from dangerous windows. Even if you don't fall, you might catch a cold. After all, I smiled, winter is coming. Her eyes widened, confusion turning to hope, but before she could say anything, I turned, my hood pulled low as I slipped into the shadows. The guards came into view, their eyes sweeping the corridor, but I was already gone from Sansa. Just another ghost in the labyrinth of Red Keep, who soon joined with Kinvara. Where were you? Plucking flowers. So, we left the keep. Pity I didn't stumble upon Joffrey today. Then again, perhaps this wasn't the best time for me to kill him. As a king, he's more of a troublemaker, not useful. If I were to kill him, it's not as if I could just sit down on the throne right there and take it. No, I'd be hunted by the entire country, first, and secondly, the Lannister would just crown Tommen instead. After all, this wasn't a kill the king and take the world type of power fantasy. Tyrion Lannister was in King's Landing, serving as the Hand. Tommen would listen to the man, which would immediately make him a more competent king than Joffrey ever was. I didn't want that. In a scenario like this, the best course of action is to wait for the best opportunity to kill Joffrey. Not only when it was safe for me, but when killing him would do the most damage. For example, maybe when the fleets of Stannis Baratheon would attack. That'd throw the entire battlefield into chaos, after all. And I could just kill Stannis, unworried about a Tommen situation there. If not that, then some other perfect time to kill the twat that was Joffrey. Sadly, today was not that day. 24. Why's my dragon so small? Chapter 24. Why's my dragon so small? I wasn't worried about Kinvara and Cersei's meeting at all, and as expected, she came out unharmed. The queen was simply double-checking if Kinvara wasn't helping Stannis. By the end of their talk, she determined Nyra was unrelated to Westeros's useless politics. I was glad they didn't find her suspicious and hang her, but then again, I doubted they could, even if they wanted to. The woman was not the mountain, but her powers surely surpassed them all for her to be walking this earth for however long she was. A few days passed since that incident, and I hadn't received any other chance of entering the Red Keep. I was not skilled enough to infiltrate it, plus I had no reason to take such a risk. Instead, I decided to focus on my dragon for a bit rather than the politics. The mansion's atmosphere was tight. All the windows were drawn shut, the doors locked and sealed. If this had been the dead of night, maybe someone with ears sharp enough would hear it, the sickening crunch of bones, the wet, visceral tearing of flesh. It would have sounded monstrous. Which wasn't far from the truth. A dragon was feasting, its teeth ripping through the bloody carcass of a freshly slaughtered sheep. Viserion's serpentine neck curled and uncurled as she gnawed at her meal, her scales glistening faintly even in the dim room. Her claws dug into the meat as if she were guarding it. It was hard to read a dragon's expression, but with her eyes narrowed, half-lidded, that could only be satisfaction. I stood beside her, my hand resting on the curve of her neck. I felt her muscles shifting beneath my palm, the deep vibrations of her growl as she ate. I enjoyed that. This was my dragon. The more she ate, the stronger she would be. The stronger I would be. I wasn't the only one watching Viserion feast. I glanced over at the sand snakes. Unlike me, they were watching from a distance, standing just outside the circle of shadow thrown by the dim lanterns. Nymeria's eyes were wide, a flicker of reverence etched into her features. Tyene stood beside her, a hand pressed over her mouth, suppressing a fascinated and unnerving smile. Obara was the furthest back, her stance more guarded, but there was no denying the awe. This creature was a legend made flesh, and it was growing bigger and fiercer each time they bore witness to her feeding. The wonder never quite dimmed. Kinvara was busy doing some priestess bullshit in the city, so it was just us here. Viserion was getting larger. It was growing evident with each passing week. Soon, it would be impossible to keep this girl confined in this old, small mansion's shadows. We got it for free, after all, so it was barely livable. The room was too small. She was too big. And more than that, she needed to grow under the open sky, under the sun and the moon, in the wild, where she could hunt and soar without restraint. This was no place for a dragon. You've seen her eat a dozen times now, I said to the girls, my voice breaking the silence. It startled them, and Nymeria blinked, tearing her eyes away from the dragon. I'd think by now you'd be used to it. Nymeria gave a sheepish grin, shrugging a shoulder. It's still something, she replied, shrugging. Listen, you won't understand since you own her. Oh, yeah, I shrugged. Tyene nodded quickly, her eyes flicking back to Viserion, who continued her feast without a care. She's getting so big, she whispered. Soon, she won't fit here. Any plans for when that happens? Yes, I was thinking the same, actually, I said, my tone thoughtful, my gaze moving to the dragon's form. But in truth, she's growing very slowly for my taste. I'm worried. Really? The girls raised their eyebrows. It had been a bit more than 3 months since she hatched, but she was only the size of a horse. I couldn't be sure if her growth speed was greater than my sister's dragons, but I didn't feel she was that larger. What was the dragon system doing? Well, it certainly did affect her. She was a bit different from the dragons of this world, She had 4 limbs and 2 wings, unlike those of this world, which were basically wyverns. I presumed just that difference made her stronger than the other dragons of her age, but I still wanted her to grow bigger. I was hoping she'd shadow over King's Landing in a year. But at this rate, I sighed. I knew from the beginning that if Viserion stayed cooped up in this mansion, her growth would be stunted. Was that the only reason for her slower growth? Dragons weren't meant to be fed in cages. They were meant to hunt, to kill, to feel the thrill of the chase. I remembered Tyrion's words when he was quoting the Maesters, how he thought Dany's dragons in Meereen didn't grow because they were kept confined. A dragon's true nature could only be realized in freedom. I looked back at the sand snakes, and a moment later, an idea found me. I think I'll be taking her out, I said, my tone casual. Been a while since she flew around. The girls glanced at each other, then back at me. Obara was the first to speak, her voice gruff. Out where? The Kingswood, I said simply. She needs to hunt real prey, something more challenging than a dead sheep. Plus, I also need to hunt. I had to level up and get spearmanship to a higher grade. My skin was slightly tougher than normal, but I was not invincible. An arrow could still pierce me where Ilaria's thrown knife hadn't. I couldn't let myself be delusional about my powers. Not yet. Tyene opened her mouth, her expression one of immediate objection, but I held up a hand. No, I said firmly. I know what you're thinking. But none of you is coming. Nymeria frowned, stepping forward, her eyes narrowing. Why not? She demanded. I wanna see. If someone sees me, I can hide, I interrupted, my gaze steady. If someone sees Viserion, I can make her disappear. Yes, so what's the issue? The more people involved, the harder it becomes to cover our tracks, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Plus, no point in risking you all unnecessarily. There was a beat of silence, the sand snakes glancing between each other. Obara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Tyene sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly, her disappointment evident, but she nodded. Nymeria, however, still looked unconvinced. You're sure? She asked, her voice quiet, her eyes searching mine. I smiled faintly, my hand brushing against Viserion's scales. I'm sure. I can handle this. Besides, I added, my tone turning lighter, it's not as if I'll be alone. I glanced at the dragon, her jaws closing around the last of her meal, her golden eyes blinking lazily at them. I've got her, haven't I? I had a nuke to protect me. Nymeria's gaze softened, and she sighed, giving a small nod. Fine, but you be careful, she said, her tone carrying a hint of warning. And come back fast. Don't make us have to come looking for you. I chuckled, pushing myself away from the wall, my hand resting against Viserion's side. I wouldn't dream of it, I said, giving them a nod before turning my attention back to the dragon. I ran a hand down her gold scales. All right, girl, let's get you out of here. I met Kinvera in the city and let her know about my decision. She had no objection, but we were too busy to chat in depth, as she was preoccupied with talking with the poor. Queen Cersei wished her good luck at the end of their talk, saying that since she wasn't friends with Stannis, she wanted Priestess, Nyra, to spend her time helping the poor. It was more of a test to see her be busy doing work rather than spying around or something. So for now, she'd have to focus on this. By the time of Renly's death, I expected her to regain her freedom. Then, I dropped by Littlefinger's brothel. The brothel was buzzing with daytime energy. It was noisy and lively, with girls lounging around, laughing, and sharing idle gossip. Heavy perfumes mingled with the smell of aged wood and alcohol. It was a different kind of atmosphere from the evenings, less desperate and more relaxed. As I entered, the laughter and chatter of the brothel whores softened, and eyes turned to me, some curious, some amused. A young girl, the same blonde who'd questioned my wealth before, caught my eye, her lips curving into a teasing smile. She put her hands on her hips, her voice lilting with amusement as she spoke. My, it's Rose Prince Charming. Should I call her for you? I laughed, a genuine chuckle escaping my lips. Yes, please, I have something to tell her, I replied, watching as she scurried off to fetch her. It didn't take long. Soon enough, Rose stepped out into the main room, her eyes finding me easily, her lips curving into a smug smile as she crossed her arms. Her auburn hair framed her face, her presence commanding without even trying. I thought you agreed not to visit me anytime soon. She called out, her tone playful, yet her eyes betrayed a glimmer of warmth. So impatient, are we? She was cute, I had to admit that. Not impatient, I said, moving closer until we were just a few steps apart. I'm heading out of King's Landing for some work, so I thought I'd drop by. Just in case you worried when I didn't show up. Her smile faded just slightly, her brows knitting as she uncrossed her arms. Ah, she blinked. Going out, what for? Just some work, I said casually, dismissing the worry in her eyes. Rose frowned, her lips pressing together for a moment, her eyes searching mine. Is it a sellsword mission? She asked quietly, a hint of concern breaking through her usual mask. Will you be all right? I couldn't help the amused scoff that left me. I'll be fine, girl, I said, giving her a reassuring smile. You've no idea how strong I am. Robert Baratheon was strong, came a voice from behind that made the room go still. The laughter faded, and every girl nearby straightened, eyes shifting towards the source. Lord Petyr Baelish stepped into view, his expression one of practiced ease, a smile playing at his lips, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. And yet, he died to a bore, he continued, his tone light, casual. So, it never hurts to be careful, my friend. Lord Baelish, Rose said quickly, bowing her head. Her tone was respectful, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. I simply returned his gaze with a small smile, my head tilting slightly in acknowledgement. Baelish's eyes flicked over me, his smile widening just a touch. I am happy. A member of the Second Sons, he said, his voice almost admiring. How fortunate that you took a liking to one of my girls. He glanced at Rose. I do hope you treat her well. I haven't seen her so elated since she joined us. She's also quite productive lately. A remarkable change. I kept my smile, nodding. I'm glad to hear that, I said, my voice pleasant. I hadn't expected to come across such a fine girl, either. Your establishment certainly lives up to its reputation, my lord. He laughed. It was a soft, smooth sound that somehow felt sharp, like the edge of a blade. Indeed, he said, his eyes still on me. Please give my regards to the Red Priestess, Mr. Viss, he said. And do be careful, wherever you're headed. I'd hate for Rose to be saddened by any unfortunate news of your demise. With that, he gave a slight bow, then turned, his footsteps fading as he moved away, leaving the room quieter than before. I scoffed under my breath. I watched his back, my smile fading into something more thoughtful. Rose stood beside me, her expression guarded. Her eyes followed Baelish until he disappeared from view. Your superior's something, I muttered very low so that only she could hear, turning back to her. Instead of sounding genuinely worried, it was almost as if he'd prefer me dead. What a man. Rose opened her mouth and hesitated as her lips pressed into a tight smile. Then she nodded, whispering, yeah, I didn't like how he worded it either. Why did he have to mention Robert Baratheon like that? She scowled, shaking her head. I held back a smile. Good, she trusted me enough to reveal her true opinion about the man. But yes, do be careful. When can I expect to see you again? A week, I'd say, I replied, my tone light, teasing. If I'm late, then assume I'm dead for real. She scowled again, glaring at me, her eyes narrowing. Don't joke about that, she snapped, but her voice had no real anger, just worry. Poor girl was in love. I was starting to feel a little bad now for playing with her feelings. But promise, if she agreed to work for me after I'd reveal my true allegiance, she'd be happier than the happiest whore in the world. She'd become a big shot in this world. I laughed, reaching out to brush her hair back from her face. Sorry, I said softly. I'm really tougher than I look. I'll prove it to you one day. On the night of our dinner date, I added, winking at her. She giggled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. I'll be waiting, she said, her voice softening, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something that made her hesitate before she leaned forward, pressing her lips to mine in a brief, tender kiss. The girls around us gasped dramatically as I returned it, my hand resting on her waist for a moment before I pulled back, giving her one last smile before I turned away, making my way out of the brothel. It had been weeks since she stopped seeing customers, so I didn't hate kissing her. Ah, poor girl, I thought, feeling the sweetness of her lips. If only she knew that she was being used. But hey, she couldn't hate me for it. I was saving her from the inevitable death she'd face to Joffrey. She'd have to become my information broker. I hoped she'd not make a foolish choice when the time came. Rose followed me to the door, watching as I mounted my horse. Her eyes never left me as I rode away. The city stretched out before me, and soon, I found myself in Kingswood. Author note: unfortunate, we're at 924 stones right now. Another chapter comes out tomorrow. I won't put any goals for this since I'll be too busy with some IRL stuff to actually write in case we cross it. Of course, keep voting if you're enjoying the story. 22 comments, 0 vote. 25 Weak Human. Chapter 25, Weak Human. The path to the gazebo was strewn with sand and stone as she walked beside Jorah, her gaze fixed ahead. Her mind swirled with uncertainty as she approached the gazebo. Dany's dragons were missing, many of her blood riders dead, and every promise of safety from Karth's grand city gates had turned out to be nothing but dust. With a storm brewing in her heart, she smelled the scent of seawater mixing with the acrid stench of blood as they came to a stop. Before them stood a gazebo framed by 4 pillars. Under its shadow, a woman was wetting a paintbrush, dipping it into a goat's skull filled with fresh blood. Esser Jorah, the Andal. The masked woman spoke without looking up, her attention on painting a strange pattern across a man's bare back. Dany watched the strange process. The blood trickled down his skin, and he remained eerily still. Is she a sorceress? She wondered. Maybe she should return, then. She didn't like sorcerers, for one had claimed her husband's life. The masked woman, whose name was Quaithe according to Esser Jorah, continued her work as she spoke. This man must sail past Old Valyria. All who travel close to the Doom need protection. We didn't come here to talk about protection, Jorah grunted, stepping forward, his eyes flicking uneasily over the blood-soaked scene. I know, Quaithe replied, her voice calm. Her eyes, the only visible part of her face through her mask, turned towards Daenerys. You're here for your dragons. Her gaze was as though she could see right through her, past the uncertainty and exhaustion, to the desperation she fought to hide. Daenerys's heart skipped a beat. Jorah's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his spear. You have them, he demanded, voice edged with suspicion. Where are they? Draw your spear. Quaithe paused her painting, her gaze shifting to Jorah, her voice holding a challenge. See what your steel is worth here. Esser Jorah, enough. Daenerys' jaw clenched, and she stepped between them. She placed a hand on Jorah's arm, feeling the taut muscles beneath the fabric. He tensed but obeyed, stepping back, though his eyes never left Quaithe. Do you have my dragons? Daenerys asked, her tone steely, her patience frayed. Quaithe tilted her head slightly, her movements unhurried. I do not, princess. The air thickened with tension, and Daenerys clenched her teeth. She looked at Jorah, sighing. Another loose end, she said, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. Not a loose end. You were led here for guidance, Quaithe said simply. You seek your dragons, but they are only a part of your path. You must seek the last of your blood. Alone, you can't achieve your goals. Daenerys frowned, her eyes narrowing. The last of my blood. Much of my blood was slaughtered in this city, she snapped, her words cold. The blood of her blood, a large number of her loyal Dothraki, had perished. They're not your blood, the woman shook her head. Your blood is the blood of dragons, and they are mere barbarians. They're not who I'm talking about. Dany scoffed. Was this woman insane? If you mean Viserys, he must be dead in some desert and good riddance. Quaithe scoffed softly, stubborn as ever. The Targaryens must stand together, princess. He's not dead, he has one of the dragons, and you will need him. Dany stared at her. One of the dragons, not just the egg. She couldn't be sure what this woman meant, but her decision was final. I need no one but my dragons, Daenerys shot back, turning to leave. This was nothing but another cryptic waste of time. And if Viserys was indeed alive, the first thing she'd do to him after finding him was burn him to ashes. She had lost much, starting with her husband, her child, and then her blood riders. Why should she look for Viserys, who had never been anything but cruel? No, wasn't it due to him that Drogo died? When he forced Drogo to let him escape by blackmailing the child in her womb, the entire Dothraki saw Drogo as a weakling. That must be why one of those blood riders dared insult and challenge him, prompting him to get that wound that ultimately led to his demise because of that witch's betrayal. In one sense, it wasn't the witch's fault, nor was it Dany's for trusting that witch. It was her brother's fault, that useless piece of human trash. The last of her blood. It was good to know that he was alive, because she'd kill him with her own hands one day. Quaithe's voice cut through the air, stopping her mid-step. Hey, Do consider my words, princess. But as for your dragons, she said, while I do not have them, I do know where they are. Daenerys paused, her heart thudding, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned back, eyes wide with a glimmer of hope. Tell me, she demanded, her voice low. The sun had dipped beneath the horizon, leaving the world draped in twilight as I slid off my horse's back. The edge of Kingswood stretched out before me, and impossibly high silhouettes of trees cast long, wavering shadows across the earth. The stillness of the evening hung heavy in the air as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting for what was to come. The forest at night was just how I wanted it. It was quiet, dark, and most importantly, without prying eyes. If someone had decided to wander into Kingswood by chance, they'd see nothing but shadow. And shadows, I could handle. Plus, Kingswood was the private hunting ground of the king, so it was safe for me to bring Viserion here since nobody else would be here to hunt. Joffrey was busy in the capital. I led my horse to a small thicket, tying the reins loosely around a low-hanging branch before turning back to face the woods. Dany White neighed softly, its eyes showing a mix of exhaustion and unease, its nostrils flaring as if sensing what lurked in these woods. I patted its neck briefly, muttering a quick reassurance. Stay put, I've got something bigger to handle. With that, I stepped away, making my way deeper into the trees. The path was littered with fallen leaves and the occasional half-buried stone, and the night air grew cooler with each step. My boots crunched against the underbrush, but I didn't try to move quietly. There was no need for stealth tonight. The forest seemed to shift around me, the darkness growing thicker, almost tangible. My senses were on high alert, picking up the scattered movements of animals in the distance. I picked on the soft rustle of leaves as nocturnal creatures skittered about. My senses were far sharper than those of a normal man. I wondered just how strong I was. I didn't quite understand my limits, but I never bothered to test them since I kept getting stronger each level up. Regardless, my senses allowed me to move around the forest without confronting danger as I scouted the area. The forest was fascinating, really. Seeing animals larger than what I remembered from Earth, their glowing eyes watching from the shadows, cautious but unafraid. Stags, larger than anything I'd ever seen before. Wild boars, their tusks gleaming even in the dim moonlight. But those weren't my prey tonight. I found a clearing soon enough. It was a break among the cluster of trees, an opening large enough for what I intended. The moonlight filtered down through the gaps, throwing silver beams across the forest floor. I exhaled, spreading my palm and facing the air. The air trembled, and space-time cracked. It split, revealing darkness on the other side, with a flash of golden. It wasn't even a heartbeat later that she burst forth, Viserion, a blur of shimmering scales and feral energy. She didn't greet me, the rude girl, as her wings beat down, propelling her upward with a rush of wind. Leaves stirred around me, ruffling my hair as I watched her ascend. She let out a roar that was a deep, resonating sound reverberating across the clearing. It silenced everything. She took to the sky, her form disappearing against the dark canvas above, her golden wings a blur against the stars. I stepped back, my eyes fixed on her silhouette as she hovered, her head turning, surveying the land beneath her while fire slipped from her nostrils. I had chosen this clearing because it was away from the densest part of the forest, away from the chance of setting the entire forest ablaze. But as Viserion let out another roar, diving down with a burst of speed, flames spewing forth from her jaws, I couldn't help the slight pang of uncertainty that crept into my thoughts. The fire lit up the clearing, turning night into day for the briefest moments. Maybe the night wouldn't matter if someone truly was around. They'd see the dragon to all her glory, and rumors would spread like wildfire. Shit, starting next time, I had to visit even further than Kingswood. Somewhere less occupied. The deer scattered, some caught by the flame, their cries echoing as they fell, the forest floor alive with chaos. The air reeked of smoke, the heat of the fire licking at the nearest branches, but the trees remained, for now, untouched. I stood back, watching as Viserion descended upon the carcasses, her eyes glinting, her snout lowering to feast. She grabbed it with her jaw and took off to the sky, vanishing. I couldn't help but grin. I didn't have a proper army yet, but I felt invincible when I saw a sight like this. She was powerful, more powerful than anything in this world, and she was mine. Rarg, my body jolted as a roar came from behind me. It wasn't from Viserion, no, it was something else. Instinct took over as I spun, hand already reaching for my spear from my inventory. The sound was guttural and full of fury, and my eyes locked onto the source. It was a tiger, larger than anything I had ever seen before, even larger than Viserion. Well, that wasn't a surprise considering she was only as large as a horse right now. The tiger's eyes glowed in the dark, its muscles rippling beneath its striped fur as it stalked forward, lips pulled back to reveal sharp teeth. I drew my spear, the blade glinting in the moonlight, my stance shifting as I readied myself. I was strong, but could I beat a tiger in 1v1? I felt like a madman as I faced it. The tiger growled, its eyes locked on me, and I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins. This was not a fight I had anticipated, but it was one I would face. The tiger lunged, muscles coiled like a spring, its eyes fixed on me. My grip on my spear tightened, my body moving instinctively. I was ready to test my limits. But before I could even swing, a shadow passed overhead, a deafening roar echoing through the clearing. Grorg! Viserion came crashing down from above, her jaws opening wide as she unleashed a burst of fire. The tiger barely had time to react, its roar turning into a strangled cry as the flames engulfed it, the heat searing through fur and flesh. The beast fell, its body crumpling to the ground, smoke rising from the charred remains. Viserion didn't hesitate, she pounced on the still smoking carcass, her jaws snapping down, tearing through flesh and bone. I watched, my heart still pounding, my spear still in my hand, as my dragon feasted, her growl echoing into the night. And then something happened, something I couldn't have anticipated. Viserion lifted her head, her eyes turning towards me, the flames still flickering around her jaws. Her lizard-like gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in them, something intelligent. She narrowed her eyes, her head tilting slightly, and then, to my utter disbelief, she spoke. Weak, human, she growled, a guttural, loud voice that made the leaves tremble. It sounded like the eruption of a volcano. I stared in disbelief as her deep voice resonated through the clearing. Her words were harsh but not dripping with disdain, and her spelling sounded like that of a child trying to copy something she'd heard. I stared, stunned into silence, my grip on my spear loosening. Before I could even comprehend what had just happened, Viserion spread her wings, pushing off the ground with a powerful beat. The wind stirred the leaves around me as she took to the sky once more. I stood there, alone in the clearing, my eyes following her form as she disappeared into the night, her words still echoing in my mind. Weak human. The clearing fell silent, the only sound the distant crackle of the fire still smoldering. I lowered my spear, exhaling slowly, my mind still reeling. So my dragon could speak. That was new, and despite the respect bar being high, she was a moody little lizard. That girl needs to respect her elders, I laughed. Finally, the dragon system was doing its job. Come find fellow fans on Discord and more chapters on Patreon. As Patreon now uses the 30-day payment method, if you sub today, you'll only have to pay again at the same date of next month. Patreon, patreon.com/master4thwall. Discord, web links.